the research about descriptive experience sampling, it seems that it uncovers many, it can uncover things that people don't know about themselves that are quite surprising for people.
What's up, everybody? From Nautilus, I'm Brian Gallagher, and you're watching Behind the Scenes. Today, we're speaking with Phil Jaekl. Phil is a science writer and author, and his writing has appeared in places like The Atlantic, New York Magazine, and The Guardian. And he's the author of Out Cold, a chilling descent into the macabre, controversial, life-saving history of hypothermia. He lives in the Arctic region of Norway. And his recent story in Nautilus was, I didn't know my mind was so strange until I started listening to it. Phil, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
So to start off, would you mind summarizing your background intellectually and as a writer for our viewers?
Yeah, I was doing research in cognitive neuroscience. I graduated from York University in Toronto, and then I did postdoctoral work in Spain and in Rochester, New York. And I was researching multisensory integration. So that has to do with parts of the brain that combine sensory information from the various senses. And in particular, I was working on audio-visual sensory integration. So that's finding ways where our perception of audio-visual events is different from auditory or visual events on their own as a unisensory aspect. And then I went on to writing, and actually my very first article was for Nautilus some years ago, and I believe that you commissioned it, Brian. So thanks
Right on.
again. And then I recently wrote my first book, Out Cold, about ways of using cold therapeutically, and now I live in the cold. There's actually snow outside right now. We've had it for a few days, and I enjoy life here in the Arctic in Norway. It's not for everyone, but if you like doing outdoors kinds of things, then it's incredible.
How did you originally get interested in studying neuroscience and the cognitive aspect of that?
I had a my PhD supervisor. He was a fantastic teacher, and he made it very interesting. So he investigated visual vestibular sensory integration. That's how your sense of balance and what you see is neurally integrated. And we got to do all sorts of cool things, like go on microgravity flights where the plane does these parabolas up and down, and when it goes down, you just drop. We did experiments while in microgravity, and it was exciting times, and I wanted to follow that through into grad school and start doing my own research.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I would love to experience microgravity. Um, so what was the impetus or the inspiration for writing about listening to your own mind recently?
Well, I've always been fascinated with inner experience, and in particular inner speech. Um, I wrote an article for Eon, another fantastic science magazine, and I did some interesting interviews. And for this piece, I was inspired by something I saw. It was viral. It was a meme about how people who innerly speak to themselves often be aware who don't actually innerly speak, and vice versa. And they think each of those groups thinks that the other group it's impossible for them to imagine how that could be. And I was wondering if so for people who innerly speak, there is some no, no, not for people who innerly speak, but what I wanted to say is that there is some research on inner speech. It's difficult to do it scientifically because it's a subjective thing that can't be quantified or measured directly. So so it's difficult to research, but the existing research seems to suggest that it's important cognitively. We need it for processing information in different ways, and it benefits us greatly for establishing other things as well, like self identity and self awareness, and some scientists even think that it's a crucial aspect of our mental being. And I was wondering if somebody doesn't innerly speak, then there should be some consequences or something measurable. And I thought maybe there's a gap in the research, and I contacted Russ Hurlburt along with Alain Morin and some other psychologists to ask them, hey, what's going on here? It seems like there are genuinely people that don't innerly speak, and if that's the case, then if it's so crucial for for cognition and for these other things, um, there's no research showing this, or am I naive? And perhaps there is some research out there that I wasn't aware of. And I got talking to Rush through email, and I was well aware of his descriptive experience sampling method. And I woke up one morning and there was an email in my inbox saying, "Hey Phil, do you want to actually try it and see for yourself, and then you can discover things about your own inner speech, perhaps, if you do innerly speak." And I was quite confident that I do, but I had read about these people that are also similarly confident that they do, and discover that they don't actually talk to themselves, or very rarely.
So you want to give us a brief summary of the story? You kind of lay out how that experiment went for you as a participant, kind of logging your thoughts as the device you had sort of beeped, and you could kind of get a unique glimpse into what you're actually thinking, because usually you don't you're no one is prompted to actually record what they have to be thinking at whatever particular time. So want to briefly sketch what you wrote about there for our viewers who haven't read the piece yet?
Yeah. Okay. So, reading the research about descriptive experience sampling, it seems that it uncovers many. It can uncover things that people don't know about themselves that are quite surprising for people, and what it involves is so you don't actually, what I'm trying to say is that many people don't actually pay attention to the form of their inner experience, or what's going on at any given moment, because you're too busy experiencing you're too busy experiencing life and doing the things that you do to have this meta knowledge of what the contents and what the form of your inner experiences actually are. So, descriptive experience sampling requires the participant to wear a beeper. This is the beeper that I wore, and it's programmed. It was engineered by Russ Hurlburt. So he makes these, and they're programmed to go off um, about every hour when you're wearing it. And what you do is you make a note. So if it goes off, you make a note of what you were experiencing the moment right before it went off, and then he wants you to log about 6 experiences per day. And you're free to wear it wherever you want, whenever you want. That's up to you. And once you have 6 experiences, he interviews you about those experiences, and you flesh out some more detail or make things a little bit more clear, and and that's about it. Um, so I got 54 samples in total, and we spoke about each one in sessions that were about an hour or so on average, I would say.
What was it like talking to him about some of the things you ended up jotting down about what you were experiencing?
Oh, it's interesting. He's a very interesting person to speak with, and he he I think he would be a good lawyer. He really wants you to get down to the details and be clear about what you're saying, um and if I think it makes a big difference with him if you're confident or if you're not confident. If you're wavering on what you say, then he sort of has different ways of asking the same question, or he listens to you very carefully to see if you repeat something but describe it slightly differently. So he's very attuned to all the details of what you're saying, trying to get a confident description of what a given experience involved.
Was there anything you said in particular that he wanted to ask more about or wanted to delve more deeply into? Anything that you can remember you saying?
Oh, everything. I would say everything. But
Mm.
that said, um, some some aspects of my experiences were quite peripheral, I would say, and there wasn't more to describe. Um, how how many ways can I describe a certain sound that I heard, or how I somebody I, for one of my experiences, somebody outside had sneezed, and they went "Achoo!" and I thought that they had said duck shoe. It sounded like somebody had said duck shoe, which is kind of odd, but that's the case. I think he was asking me about that for, I don't know, 10 minutes, and I had nothing. I couldn't give him any more than it sounded like somebody said duck shoe.
Mm. So
That's just the
the
first
title,
example that comes to mind.
yeah, yeah. Um, so the title of the piece is, talks about how strange your mind is. So what was so strange about listening to your own mind? What takeaways did you come away with after going through this experience of reporting your own inner thoughts and talking about them? Like, do
Okay,
you have a
yeah,
really different view of?
yes. The first thing that struck me was how often I had nothing to report. The beeper would go off, and I mean, it's quite clear, what were you experiencing at the moment right before the beep? And I had nothing. And it happened to me a number of times, and I began to think that there was something wrong with me, or there's something I didn't understand about how to do this. And it it turns out that well, what Russ told me, and I completely agree using my own cognitive neuroscientific knowledge, is that there's no reason why you have to be experiencing something at any given moment. If you think about it, right now, your mind, your brain, listener's brain, my brain is blocking out all sorts of irrelevant things, like the feeling of the chair on my back, or the temperature of the room, or all sorts of sensory information is blocked out, and it doesn't have to doesn't have to stop at that. It can your mind can be blank. I guess maybe it's what somebody who's trying to meditate is sort of trying to achieve, but it doesn't have to be through meditation. I don't know if was experiencing, I'm not about to say that I was often in a meditative state, but that's the first thing that I discovered about my mind while doing DES. And then, contrary to that, what I often noticed was a multiplicity of experiences going on at the same time. In the article, I wrote about how I had two streams of inner speech, two simultaneous streams of inner speech. I was rehearsing the combination of my bike lock, and I was wondering if I should wear this with this earpiece in my ear while entering a bank. And and yeah, I was a bit weirded out when I when it came down to writing what my experience was. I was like, hey, I was like talking to myself, but with two separate voices. And apparently, this is a thing. It's not entirely uncommon. But I also had a multiplicity. I also had multiple simultaneous inner experiences in different forms while looking at something. Uh, yeah, I think I also described this in the article. I was looking at a bush just outside, moving in the wind, and contemplating the location of a box that had blown into my neighbor's yard, and also experiencing some connection between the bush that I was watching and its colors. But yeah, some kind of connection between that bush and the box, like this weird geometric sense. Um, Many of the experiences had multiple aspects to them. And that's kind of contrary to how I naively think that most people think of how the mind works. It's like a constant stream of unitary experiences. If you well, that's sort of how I thought it was, but I discovered that there are all sorts of things going on at any given moment, or there can be absolutely nothing going on, a vacancy or a blankness.
Yeah, I often find that I'm lost in thought. So my mind is just going off on different tangents, and I'm not trying to do that. I'm not being deliberate about it. And then if I remember that, I can think to myself, "Oh, that's interesting. Like, why am I thinking about that?" And then I can kind of seize the reins of my thought train, and maybe do something deliberate, or try to just notice as thoughts arise, like out of my control. And it's just kind of interesting to watch in your mind's eye as one thought and another
Yeah,
thought kind of just brings to mind without any control. And it's also so
right.
weird why we talk to ourselves. Like, if I'm feeling like I want to have a sip of coffee, I'll say to myself in my head, "Oh, I want a sip of coffee right now." But like, why do I need to say that to myself? Like, who's listening? It's who am I talking to? It's just such an odd phenomenon when you think about it.
Yes, yes, I completely agree. There's no need to talk to, you're not going to tell yourself anything that you don't really know.
Right, exactly.
But
That's
it
like
could
the
be,
spooky thing. Like,
it could be, I, I sort of think of it, and I'm really not the expert, but based on talking to the different researchers and some of the research that I've done, it seems like it could be a way of sort of organizing and labeling your thoughts so that you make them a bit more concrete instead of just experiencing the world in a wordless manner as though you don't have language. Um, that's sort of how I think of it. But you mentioned that thoughts sort of arise, like you experience thoughts arising, or thoughts in the form of inner speech. Um, And I was also going to say that something I discovered about myself doing this descriptive experience sampling was that my inner speech often seemed relatively passive. And I wrote this about this in the article as well. Um, when if you're trying to solve a puzzle, for example, you're very deliberate in your thoughts and careful about, or if you're writing something, you're careful about the words that you choose. But I found that a lot of the time, it was my experiences were like I was just listening to a narration of my thoughts in my voice. And I had a lot of difficulty, had considerable difficulty describing if I was experiencing inner speech or inner hearing in my interviews with Russ. That's something that came up probably every time we spoke, and he really tried to get me to narrow down if it was an active thing or a passive thing, or if I felt like I was listening to like inner hearing is like you're hearing something like as though it's played on the radio or out in the world somewhere something's making a noise. And it wasn't quite like that, but it also wasn't like innerly like what I would imagine how people typically think of innerly speaking as an active sort of process. So that was another thing that I discovered.
Yeah, I think that is a useful distinction because I will often hear a voice that seems like me trying to tell me something or trying to direct my attention elsewhere, and that can be if I'm trying to focus on writing a piece or something, and then
Hmm.
a thought in the form of my voice will intrude and try to get my attention elsewhere, like, oh, isn't there's something else you need to do right now, or and then you can have a
Hmm.
conversation with yourself. You'll have like an inner speech and inner hearing at the same time, and it's so odd when you
So
draw your attention to it. But even then it's like, how can your attention be fragmented in these ways where you're paying attention to a conversation that's happening with yourself? It's so odd.
yeah, yeah. It seems kind of crazy, but it's not. And yeah, I completely agree with like I can relate to how you're describing your own inner experiences.
Can you tell us any interesting bits of research that you came across in your writing and speaking with scientists on this topic that didn't end up making it into the story? Stuff that you might have included but ended up not. Um,
Yeah. So when I was talking to Russ, he was telling me about um, a participant that he had in the very early days of the research, and it was this woman who she had some traumatic issues, and she had been abused, and yeah, she had some bad times, and she had she had these experiences that she was describing to him, and and then it in one particular experience involved quite trivial. It didn't involve past memories or anything like that, but he told me that she was looking at an advertisement for some jewelry, and in the advertisement there was a row of teddy bears, each wearing a different piece of jewelry. And she told him that right before the beeper sounded, she was looking at this ad and looking at each of the bears with their jewelry. And then he asked her, well, which bear in particular were you looking at? And she said that she was looking at all of them. Um, she was remembering this. She wasn't actually looking at it. I think yeah, I should be clear there. The way that I remember his description, she was recalling this ad, and he thought, well, how could you be looking? you innerly be visually recalling each of the bears at the same time? And she said, no, that's the case. And then the next day he brought with him um, what's called a bistable illusion. It might be familiar to you. It might be familiar to some viewers, and it's a picture where you can either interpret it as a vase or you can interpret it as two faces looking at each other. Um,
Hmm.
if you
I'm
just
familiar
look,
with that one.
if
Yeah.
you Google bistable illusion, um, so anyway, he showed this to her and asked her if she was familiar with it, and she said that she had never seen it before. And then he asked her, okay, what do you see? And she said, well, I see two faces looking at each other, and I see a vase. And he said, are they alternating? Because that's when you look at it, it's either one or the other. But for her, it was both at the same time. Um, and I think that's fascinating because I don't know how a brain can do that. It is apparently it's possible. Um, she described other experiences involving simultaneous perceptions that aren't normally possible. Um, he also described some types of inner experiences that are very rare. An example fails me right now, unfortunately, though. But he has through the research that he's done, it seems there are five main types of inner experience. There's inner speech, there's inner seeing, there's inner hearing, there's sensory awareness. Um, no, now I'm getting them mixed up because there's also emotions. I
Hmm.
guess inner hearing and inner seeing are a form of sensor. They have a sensory aspect to them. But anyway,
For
there's
sure.
also another form of inner experience called unsymbolized thinking, and that's just processing information, thinking, although the definition of thinking is quite vague, but without language or non-visually or just without any symbolized structure to it whatsoever. And he's come across some people that have other types of experiences that don't easily fit into these categories, which I also found quite fascinating.
Yeah. And that reminds me of the duck rabbit illusion. Have you heard or seen of that?
Right, that's another bistable, or there's a one with a witch and a young lady.
Yeah.
There are moving ones where something is moving one way, or you look away and then you look back at it. It looks like it's like a skater spinning. Um, it,
Yeah.
they're
Like a ballerina
bidirectional.
spinning. Yeah.
A ballerina,
Yeah, those
yeah,
are fast. Yeah, because I am more normal where I don't think I can see the duck and the rabbit at the same time. It's either like I it's so weird how this happens because it's like you tell yourself, okay, now I want to look at the duck, and then you look at it and there's a duck. And then you say, okay, now I want to see the rabbit. And then you look at it again and
yeah,
the image doesn't change. It's
yeah.
just like it's not it's not clear what you're doing in your own mind to get yourself to see what you want to see, but it's so weird how you can choose what to see
It
when the
is. I
image itself
experienced
doesn't
something
change.
similar with if I close my eyes and then there are colored patterns that move, and I color it, and then I'll see what are those patterns in that color. I don't know if I don't know if I'm unique in that way, but yeah, I it is strange.
Can you say anything about the impact your story has had? What kind of response or feedback have you received after the piece went live?
I I I was in so I live in Norway and I'm Canadian, and I was at home visiting my family and my friends, and I was at I was at my mom's, and she's probably one of the only people in the world who I know who does not have the internet, and I didn't spend much time online, so I don't have too much to say. And now it's been over a week. It's been a couple of weeks, so I haven't looked into it so much.
No worries, no worries. Anything you're writing now? Any pieces you're working on?
Right now, I'm about to start a piece for a new magazine called Return, and it's about nothing related to cognitive neuroscience or even anything scientific for that matter. It's about how going on physically demanding solo adventures in nature can can in some ways be advantageous relative to sort of new age or pop psych solo solo meditative retreats or I find that these things involve escaping, whereas um, going out in nature and doing something really physical involves um, connecting with nature and seeing yourself from a potentially broader perspective. And and psychologically, well, there. See, I guess it is about something psychological. So yeah, I think it's been psychologically beneficial in ways not offered by more popular pop psych kind of solo activities.
Mm.
Yeah,
So you're out there hiking through the snow and ice and just subjecting yourself to the elements and giving yourself a bit of a
yeah,
challenge to overcome.
yeah, exactly. Giving yourself a challenge, and and even if you don't succeed, just the the journey is worth the reward, kind of thing.
That's really cool. I look forward to seeing that online whenever it's going to be ready.
Thanks very much.
You want to tell you want to tell our viewers where they can find you online, whether you have a website or social media they can follow, so they can probably find that piece when it's ready and you share it.
Sure. Yeah, my website is philipjaekl.com. It's as easy as that. So it's just my full first name and last name.com. And if I would love to hear any thoughts that your viewers might have. Um, so feel free to contact me through my website, send me a message, and I will try my best to get back to you.
Right on. And once again, if you haven't read Phil's recent piece on how strange his mind is when he was trying to listen to it, go check that out. And thank you so much, Phil. It was great talking to you about this.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks. It was great to chat.